from the CyberHub bunker and studio. You're listening to the CISO Talk podcast. No sales, no bullshit, just straight talk. Straight talk. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Hello, folks. Welcome to the CISO Talk podcast, Veteran November. Happy Veterans Day for those that are joining me today. This is our Veterans Day episode. Thank you for your service. I have a legendary InfoSec person joining me for this very special Veterans Day episode. But before I introduce him, which you can see him on the screen, and if you don't recognize him, shame on you. What planet have you been living on? Subscribe right now to the podcast. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe, turn on the bell, comment, feedback, likes, all help in promoting our podcast. Thank you so much. And that's it for my self-promotion today. Gary, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, folks, Gary Hayslip, he's the CISO over at SoftBank, and he's joining me today. We've got a great Veterans Day episode, so I'm very excited to have Gary kind of be the flagship episode for the month of November. Gary, obviously, flagship, all the Star Wars behind you, kind of all falls into place real quick. So for our listeners, tell us a little bit about what branch of the service you were in, how long you served for, and what you did.
I was in the U.S. Navy, and I served for just a little over 20 years. So I did a full career. I was a fire controlman. So I worked on advanced weapon systems. Big thing about being an FC is that you ride quite a lot of ships. And so I was on multiple warships on both the East Coast and the West Coast, and did about 8 deployments, 3 of them combat tours during my 20 years in the U.S. Navy. So
how'd you get into cyber? How did you find from advanced weapons? I kind of figured you'd be at like Lockheed developing the next great missile to blow everything up. So how'd you end up in cyber?
It was, the thing about this is that I'd always been hacking and playing with computers since I was a young kid. And, when I became a teenager, got more involved with it. Got involved with it heavily in college before I dropped out of college and joined the military. And the weird thing was that it was like, I was leaving, one ship, going to shore duty. And while I was on shore duty, I was working on my bachelor's degree in IT. And while I was working on my bachelor's degree, I started programming and building a website for the command and doing a whole bunch of different stuff, on the side. And so they ended up partnering me up with another guy, and they wanted both of us to go ahead and kind of run the IT systems and still do my regular job. And just happened to be, this guy that I got partnered up with at the time was his name was Scott Hammer. OS1 Hammer. Guy was brilliant. Just brilliant, from a hacking perspective. And I learned just so much from him in 2.5 years that I worked with him. And he was the one that kind of flipped the switch and got me to, I was already by then playing with networks and already doing stuff, but he was the one that got me to start looking on, under the covers, start looking behind the scenes and seeing all that, the whole dark side of the web. And this is in the mid 90s, in the late 90s, when everything was just kind of the wild, wild west. And I just became fascinated by it.
So, when you talk of that period of time, the internet wasn't really internet, right? Most people knew the internet by AOL, you've got mail, right? Like that was the thing. You'd get your AOL free trial, CD-ROM in the mail, and that's how you kind of got into it. It was kind of like you're right, the wild, wild west, but it wasn't really, the threats weren't the same back then as they are now, correct? I mean, obviously.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And the thing was that at that time there was so much growth. There was so much expansion, so many networks and sites and companies were being put on the network, and even DoD itself, they were adding more and more things, to the internal networks in the Department of Defense. And I remember there were times where, sitting with Hammer, we were just using regular hack tools, and it was insane the things that we could see on the network. because they weren't properly configured or they weren't locked down. And yet they were so busy building, and nobody at that time was really thinking about security, and thinking about infrastructure and just the architecture of what they were putting together. And yeah, it was just, you'd spend hours, just the things that you would get into at that time just blew me away, and I just, I became fascinated by it. But at the same time, I also became scared by it, because I started understanding the whole idea of Win Schwartow's book, on net-centric warfare. I just started understanding just where this could go, thinking 10, 20 years down the road. It just, I was already, and I guess, it was still kind of foggy, that picture, but I could see where this was going to go. And to me, I was like, I wanted to be a part of that. I was like, this is cool. Don't know where all it's going to go, but I love this stuff, and I just got more and more into it. I mean, I built a lab in my garage. I paid for my own certs. I taught myself how to hack. Got more and more involved in different forums and different, groups to go ahead and learn. And even though my job in the Navy at the time, so I was still active duty, was dealing with, advanced electronics, dealing with weapon systems. And by then I was a chief petty officer, so I was running departments, I was running divisions, I was an E7, dealing with, large groups of people. But every command I was at, as soon as they found out that I knew IT and I had certifications in it and I understood cybersecurity, which was just at that time in the late 90s, early 2000s, was just starting to kind of grow and rear its head and start to become a thing. They were calling it information security back then. All the commands were grabbing me and saying, okay, we want you to do this and still do this. And I didn't care. This is what I wanted to do. I mean, I knew it was a passion for me, and I knew I needed experience, so much so that even when I was on, Liberty, even when I was home, even when I was on leave, I was volunteering for, a lot of the nonprofits like the Boys and Girls Clubs and stuff like that out in town, to run their IT for them, to run their servers for them, because I just wanted experience. I needed, to get hands-on and work on things.
See, that's the passion that I'm going to get into later with you about, because that's kind of like one of the things that drives people to get into, cyber, right? Is you either have a passion for it or you don't. And if you don't, it shows. And if you do, like the way you were talking about it right now, in my head, I'm picturing a young version of you just doing all of that. And I'm just like, wow, like that's crazy. So tell me a little bit about your transition from military life to civilian, and kind of what was that like for you? One of the things in our Veteran November series that we really talk a lot about is that transition, because it's never easy, right? You were in for 20 years, you made a career out of it, you're retired, all of a sudden that 20 years is no throw in the bucket. That's a lot of time. By the time you leave, you're programmed a specific way, right? Like you're programmed to operate a specific way. What was that like transition?
Scary as hell. I mean, and the thing about this is, honestly, when you transition, you're given like a week class. This is how you write a resume. This is how you do an interview. And you kind of feel like an alien in some ways, because you're like, especially me, 20 years in, and I'm looking at going to join, counterparts who are out in the civilian community. And yeah, I'm just sitting, I'm like, okay, how am I going to do this? I got a wife, I've got 2 children, I've got bills, I've got a mortgage, and I'm, yeah, you're kind of freaking out, and you're basically given kind of a 1-week class, and boom, you're supposed to figure it out. If you look, at officers, they've got I'd say a lot better modeled course for helping them when they go ahead and they leave. But even then, to this day, I still even mentor and talk with officers who are getting out and looking to where to start and who to talk to, and they're looking at building their network. And I tell you, the biggest thing I learned was, my network and my mentors, is what helped me stay focused and really helped me from losing my mind, at the time, just because of, it's such a big change. I kind of felt about 2 years before I retired in 2007, about 2005 timeframe, I felt like I really needed to start getting ready. So I started getting ready 2 years ahead of time. I'd already earned my bachelor's. I already had a bunch of certifications, but I got really involved in the cybersecurity community. I joined a lot of different professional organizations. I started, working, at DEF CON and B-Sides and all the different types of events, that are going on, and meeting people in the community, in a black hat and everything, and I'm talking with vendors, and I'm talking with people who are writing and giving speeches, and a lot of it was just trying to understand what skill sets people were hiring for, what companies that were actually growing, because I basically had I had built out a mind map of my career back in 2000. And so from 2000 to 2010, I pretty much had it mapped out as to, okay, I wanted these type of certs. I needed to do my degree. I wanted to get this, and, get this experience in these areas. And what I was doing, even back then, while I was still active duty, was that I would do job searches for, like, say, network architect or security architect. And I would look at the skill sets that they expected these people to have and the experience they expected these people to have. And then I would compare it to what I, had, and then I would see the gap. I would see what I was missing, and I added that to my mind map. And then I would start looking at, okay, I can see right away I need to get more experience in network architecture. Well, to do that, I'm going to need to get my Cisco certs. Well, to do that, hey, there's a community college over here that's got a full-on Cisco school, and they do CCNA and CCNP. And so I immediately, jumped over to that junior college, and the state paid for it for free. So I was getting it for free. I just had to put 18 months of my life into understanding networks and working on my certs. And, I had a rack of Cisco equipment in my garage as part of my lab, and I taught myself that CLI, and so that I could go ahead and learn, and pass my certs. It was that type of preparation. And so when the time came for me to go ahead and retire, I switched from basically going active duty military, and I actually jumped over to civil service, for a number of years before I went into private industry. But that whole transition, being involved before, that 2 years before, I was already talking with people. I already had mentors that, that I was talking to. I already had the beginnings of a network, and it's really critical. It becomes really important, and if I had wanted to go ahead and leave and go right into, say, working for a military contractor or something like that, I could have done that in a blink of an eye, and could have done it without a hesitation at all. It just happened to be the last command I was at, they wanted me to stay and, and basically back up their CIO and also be their CISO and run their security and their network teams. And so I went ahead and I stayed for about 6 years. I mean, I did civil service, for about 6 years. But the interesting thing was my boss, who was also one of my mentors, he was one that told me to leave. When I'm in civil service, got a nice job, got a retirement, I can stay put, go ahead and do 20 years in my cubicle and just keep my head down and do my thing. He's like, dude, he goes, you've outgrown this place. He goes, you've finished your master. You really don't want to be here. He goes, private industry is where you need to go. You need to take that step. He goes, if you don't leave, I'm going to fire you. He goes, you need to get out of here. And sometimes that's what you got to do as a leader and as a mentor is you got to kick them out of the nest, and the guy I worked for, Palmer Tasker, who was an ex-vet, working civil service, he basically told me, and the crazy thing was 2 months before, I had just several of my security team members had finished up their master's degrees and everything. And I knew that they were searching, and I helped them find jobs out in the civilian community, and I let them go. And to this day, I still talk to them and still mentor them. But he said, I'm doing what you just did. You need to go. And that got me started. I went ahead and I after I had done my transition, did my time, and then I left and moved into private industry. And even as I move into private industry, again, the same thing, that network came into play. Those people that I knew, those people that I had met and, had gotten to know in the community, came into play to help me find, my next job.
Yeah, there's there's a piece to that you just brought up that I find really interesting, which is you've outgrown. And I think that's one part of the transition. I've done a lot of these episodes so far, and I've recorded a lot of these, and a lot of the veterans I speak with, when they go to civil service, you kind of get stuck in that same, I don't want to say comfort zone, but you're not far from where you're used to it. And so kind of stepping out to the civilian world becomes like, you're like, yeah, well, I don't have to do PT so much anymore. And I'm a civilian and I get weekends off and all that good stuff. And, my family's good and I'm taken care of and I've got benefits. And like you were saying, all that advantage. But then you really did step out into the private sector after 6 years in civil service. What was that like? Like, were you like ready for it? Was it that threat of you're going to get fired if you don't go out there that kind of just propelled you to go, I'm ready, here I come, world?
No, I mean, it was, I have to admit, it was interesting. I mean, I transitioned, I left, and even when I left civil service, that was an interesting transition again itself, because you are in more of a protected environment, just like, when you're active duty. And, it's like when I stepped over, I left and went to be the CISO for the city of San Diego. And, people are like, well, that's, you're going to work for another government entity. That's just, now, like, you're so full of shit. You have no idea. Because the city of San Diego is a $5 billion business.
Right.
That's what it is. I mean, it's a $5 billion business, 10,000 employees, 40 departments, 100,000 plus endpoints. I mean, 28 networks. It was amazing. And just the professionals, the people you got to work with, the projects that were ongoing. I mean, my 4 years there, I loved it. But I had to totally shift my whole approach and viewpoint and everything, from the way I did in civil service or the government. I mean, when I got to the city of San Diego, they're like, who are you? Okay, so you want me to do what? Why? Why should I listen to you? I don't have to listen to you. And that's the crap that you kind of deal with when you get into private industry. And I'm sure we'll, talk about it more, was that when you get over into private industry, they don't have to listen to you. You have to make the case. You have to build the culture. You have to they have to learn to trust you, and it's a different mindset. It's a different set of soft skills, that I had never really needed when I was in civil service, and so for me, when I made that transition, and coming over, I had to learn a whole different aspect of working with people, and getting them to go ahead and see my vision of what I wanted to do from a security standpoint. And there was one of the biggest things I think, my years as a veteran taught me until this day was the whole thing about tenacity. You're used to getting hit. You're used to getting knocked down. You're used to just embracing the suck, putting your head down and just moving forward and getting things done, because the mission is still there. You still have to go ahead and get things done, and it's been assigned to you. So it's yours, and you're going to do it. Many, citizens in private industry, they don't have that mindset. They haven't been raised that way. They haven't been, gone through, the trials by fire that we veterans go through, how we're trained and, and the things that we do on deployment and what we've been through, and so for me, that transition from basically military/civil service into private industry, there was a lot of hard knocks. There was a lot of, disappointment. There was a lot of projects that just didn't make it or collapsed. But the thing about it is that I didn't give up. I didn't go ahead and say, okay, this is too hard for me, let me go back to civil service. Instead, it was more of, all right, what am I doing wrong? I'm approaching it this way. It's not, I can't look at this and say, okay, I got 10,000 employees that are doing this wrong. No, it's me. What am I doing wrong? Why do they not care? Why do they not see what I'm trying to do? And again, my network, the mentors that I had, it was falling back and talking with them and understanding that I was approaching it wrong. That there's different skill sets involved here. There's different ways to communicate. I learned, the really cool thing about fish tacos and beer. You get together, you say you're willing to pay for fish tacos and beer, you can get together, people will come for lunch. and then you let them sit and talk, and you keep your mouth shut and just listen and hear about their issues and their problems. Hear about what technology they need, what applications they need, what data they need. Hear about what type of projects that they're trying to do and issues that their teams are having, and when I was at the city, a lot of these projects are going to benefit our citizens. They're going to benefit my neighbors, and so it was that. To me, it was like I was back in school. I was learning again. I was learning about how I could support them, how I could serve them. I was learning about, okay, my security program that I inherited had pissed a shitload of people off, because they had done the whole thing of, well, those stupid users, they're always a problem, and after I had done a couple of these lunches and I'd spent time with some people and started actually getting some champions, I had to go back and talk to my staff and explain to them, you understand those stupid users are why you have a job. You understand those stupid users are why we exist as a security team. How about we start calling them what they are, their customers? How about we approach it that way? And that was the turning point for me. That was the shift for me to start looking at cybersecurity as a service. And that's how we need to approach it.
That also led you to write a bunch of books, including the CISO Desk Reference Guide and a bunch of other ones where, I'm a firm believer in supporting other veterans, right? Yeah. And I think most veterans are. And that's why part of what I'm doing this series, it's funny. I had someone call me yesterday after the first episode aired, and they go, hey, we'd like to sponsor your November series. And I was like, it's not up for sponsorship, guys. This isn't something I'm doing for monetary. This is something to highlight other veterans and provide a library, a kind of a resource of thought leadership. I've had people on that are entrepreneurs that were veterans that went on to start their own companies. And I think that's inspirational. I think a lot of people, leave the military with a set of skills that can make them very successful entrepreneurs.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I hate to say it, but I go to Israel all the time. My wife's Israeli, and my parents are Israeli, so I'm kind of guilty of it. But I go to Israel, and everyone's like, "Yeah, I run my own startup. I have my own company," and they're all at 8,200. You know this. You get hammered all the time with it, right? Yeah. And I'm like, "Well, we have the greatest military in the world. Why don't we have more of this?"
Oh, dude. I mean, in January of this year, I was in Tel Aviv just before COVID locked everything down, and I was there for a big cybersecurity conference, and I was talking to a ton of different cyber startups. There, and I got a chance to go ahead and tour, a bunch of the universities there and talk to, a lot of previous, vets, Israeli vets, and I freaking love Israel, and the thing about this is that if you work in cybersecurity, you're going to deal with people, right, that are Israeli that are building, cybersecurity programs, because so many of them come from there, and I'm good with that. I have no problem. I will learn from anybody. And I seriously enjoy hearing just these new ideas and what they're doing with technologies, and just really fascinating, things that, just different companies that are coming out with a new twist on how to deal with this, or just something so new. I'm just like, excuse me, I want to see that, but yeah, I mean, when you look on my LinkedIn profile, there's about 100 plus articles that are there. To me, I guess the way I look at it, being a veteran, is that I'm really blessed to be where I'm at and to be in the field that I'm in and to work with the men and women that I work with in our community. And I've always believed in giving back. That I've always believed that and I have to admit, a lot of the mentors and people that I work with, that was something that they drilled into my head, was that hey, this knowledge that you gather, that you learn, that we give you, you're expected to go ahead and give it, to other people. As a chief petty officer in the U.S. Navy, it was drilled into you when you become a chief that you take care of your people, that you take care of and you mentor, and they're your family. And so the articles that I started posting up on LinkedIn, I actually originally started writing them for veterans, and then I went back and I rewrote them and started making them for a lot wider audience. And many of the chapters in the CISO Desk Reference Guide, in Volume 1, several of the chapters there, were actually written, for vets. I originally wrote them for vets, and then I went back and made it wider for a wider audience. But I always, talk about, vets. I mean, we've done volume 1 and volume 2. I just released, the book for security practitioners for small businesses. Right now, we're hoping in January I'll be releasing my 4th book, and it's actually for people who are brand new coming into the cybersecurity field. I'm writing it with 2 co-authors, and we basically walk you through how to write a resume, how to do a job search, how to go ahead and do a job interview, how to use social media, to build your brand, because you're going to need that network, why it's important, all of these beginning tools. And again, I'm looking at for vets that transition out and they contact me and they want to know where to start, and in a lot of these discussions and a lot of these, these different, I've come in and done talks at like the Microsoft Academy that, the whole room's full of vets, and, they're going through this great program that Microsoft has put together for them. And I talk to them and give them a heads up, it's all not going to be good. This field, there's a lot of stress. This field, there's a lot of burnout. You've got to be aware of that. You got to know, that there are certain things, certain skill sets that you're going to need to start, and in those discussions with them, they didn't realize I'm constantly taking notes, and I turn out and I'd flip those notes and put a chapter in my book that touched those areas, because I promised I would talk about that, because I know there's more people coming behind them. There's more of us that are coming out, and I, talked to a head of HR, for a company that's hiring people just this last week. And I talked about, veterans, and why when I interview, for people and I'm building teams and stuff, I typically look for skill sets. I typically look for that passion and how involved you are in the community and what you're doing. And, but I also look for vets too, and a lot of it is because the skills they already bring to the table, they know when they come in and it's a cybersecurity related job, there is no 9 to 5. Cyber's 24/7.
Right.
They know that cybersecurity, it's a full life cycle. So it's constant. There is no light at the end of the tunnel. It's just a long, dark tunnel that we're in, fighting the bad guys and doing our thing.
Or a long LED tunnel, or a long LED color that changes colors. I like to use that because I think a dark tunnel is like, I don't know. I like an LED tunnel. Like sometimes you got blue light, green light, red light, yellow light, white light, you name it.
Well, the thing is, I bring about the dark tunnel piece is to remind them that a lot of that darkness is stress. A lot of that darkness is the things that are happening around you. And that's the reason why you need your network. That's the reason why, you need to understand about self-care, about managing your stress. Do not take it home to you and to your family and everything. You need to be able to, whether it's working out or going for a walk, or whether it's writing or doing a podcast, do different things to be able to manage that stress, because it's inherent in the job. Because again, cyber, just as you finish one thing, there's something else. Just as you alleviate one threat, there's new threats. Just as you finish one project, well, the stack is constantly in a state of flux. You're constantly changing out technologies and integrating new things. IT is changing new things. The business shifts and they want to go ahead and go a different way. Well, now your risks have just shifted. Now you got to go back through and do a reassess. And veterans are very good at handling those changes. We're very good at taking, oh my God, this is this huge project we're dealing with, and we start thinking right away, we need to break this down into manageable pieces, grab the first piece, and we get started.
Yeah,
or other people are freaking out at the scale. We've already broken it down. We've put it together into a 2-year strategic map, and we're already moving.
Right. I agree with one thing: the tenacity, the strategic aspect of veteran thinking, the stuff that you can't acquire from a cert, the stuff that you can't acquire from a degree, that comes from the military taking you out of that bubble, that civilian thought process, and turning you into a well-oiled machine of solving problems quickly and efficiently, pays homage in cyber. And I think, when we were talking about Israel earlier, that's one of the aspects that you learn in Israel, because everyone there does compulsory service. They all go into the military. They tend to have they all tend to come with that quick problem solving. They see a problem, they quickly want to solve it. I'm a firm believer that we need to build a similar ecosystem to what Israel did in terms of how they foster their smart veterans. And encouraging entrepreneurship beyond just careers in cyber, right? But encouraging entrepreneurship. I love the guys over at Black Rifle Coffee Company because they're entrepreneurs. They came out and they created an idea. The guys who do the T-shirt I'm wearing, Grunt Style, again, veterans who came out and did a level of entrepreneurship. And I think we see a lot of guys leave Cyber Command and NSA and some of the three-letter agencies and our military, and they're entrepreneurs at heart, but they don't have the ecosystem to foster that entrepreneurship to give them that opportunity. And Israel does a good job of that because Israel knows that if those guys leave Israel, they're going to go work in Silicon Valley or in New York or London or anywhere else in the world and be paid a lot of money. So to keep that talent within the country, they've built an entrepreneurship program that helps them start companies, and I think we need to do the same here. Is one thing I keep taking away from every episode when I speak to people like you. I'm like, you know what, Gary should have had his own company. Gary could have probably solved like 25 cyber problems if he just had the right ecosystem around him. And maybe he's not up for it. Maybe Gary's just not up for it. But when I read your posts, I read your stuff, and I see the way you address your thought process behind trying to solve some of that the challenges we all face, it definitely comes from a different perspective than a traditional, wired brain, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So Gary, I want to ask you one final question before we move on to another segment, where we talk a little bit more of a CISO to CISO conversation. What's one thing you loved about your military service?
I have to admit, like when we were on deployments, I love to travel. I love just, I went to about 54 different countries over my 20-year career. It's kind of interesting. I tell my wife, I said, there's times where I still miss being at sea, just being with my team, being with the people that I was serving with, and just regular morning, getting coffee. We got maintenance that day. We're working on, the gun system or whatever, or I'm heading up to the combat to go on watch. Just that sense of being, part of that team, and that we've got a mission and that we're moving to accomplish that mission, and then we're all together. I still miss that in a lot of ways. It's interesting. There's times where I still I'll wake up from a dream where I still think I'm on ship, or I still think I'm on deployment. Even 13 years later, you still miss the people that you serve with.
Yeah, I'd say every episode so far has had that ending, and I think that brotherhood is something we all miss. That community, that aspect of seeing those men and our brothers and sisters. I won't say men and women because they're it's literally the HBO series Band of Brothers wasn't just a saying. It was really it's what it is. You can have brothers and sisters and you can grow up with them, but when you go to the military and you serve with someone for you do 2, 3, 4 tours with them, they become closer than family because they see you sometimes in moments you go through experiences that you probably, and you'd never wish to go through them with your family, right? Like, I don't think anyone goes, man, I wish my brother was with me while we're getting shot at in a desert in Afghanistan. Like, that's never something anyone's ever said, right? So you kind of hope you never have to go through those experiences with your family. But you go through experiences with our brothers and sisters in service that just always stick with you, always stay in your memory, and always kind of, they walk you through life. Every single aspect of it. Folks, I'm going to continue the conversation with Gary, but for those of you listening, it's only going to be out tomorrow. If you're watching, it's coming right up. We're going to let it out a day early so you guys can actually watch it. So if you're listening and you want to continue this conversation, here's where you need to go. You need to go to YouTube, look up the CyberHub podcast or CISO Talk podcast, and just click on the episode. Scooch over about 34 minutes. And you can continue listening to our conversation there. For those watching, we're going to continue this. But for those listening, again, go to YouTube. Subscribe to our page, please. I'm like a few subscribers away from monetization, folks. Like, help a brother out will ya? So we're going to continue right now. So Gary, let's kind of move to a completely different conversation. I want to say, let's have a CISO to CISO conversation a little bit. You talked a lot in the veteran portion of this interview about leadership. But one of the greatest challenges that most chief information security officers face is in their leadership, right? It's being able to properly communicate not only to their own teams, but across the enterprise. You've written books about it. You've talked a lot about it. But what are some of the things that you feel like are necessary qualities for a CISO now in 2020 going into 2021 to really be successful across not only his own team, but the enterprise?
Some key skills and qualities. I think one of the biggest things we're seeing right now for CISOs is, almost all of us have some type of technical skills. We come from, some type of a technical background. It used to be most of us, came from IT or network type background, and we came over, to security. Now you've got people coming in from all different areas. I still think it's really critical that you understand networks, not just on-prem, but also cloud, that you understand that flow of how data flows through, the way networks were built out, the way they're architected, how data is handled, just because it helps you better understand how things are going to be attacked. It better helps you understand, when you're doing controls, what areas that you're covering. So I think it's a good thing to have, knowledge in networks. Some of the other skills I think that are really critical are, you have to be, good in communication, being able to communicate, not just write, but also being able to speak and also listen. The reason I go ahead and I bring that up is one of the biggest things I see a lot. Cybersecurity is really all about managing risk, and when you're a CISO for an organization, whether it's small or whether it's large, no matter how you slice it, you're all about change. You're going to change things. You're going to change the way the employees used to do things, which tends to piss them off. You're going to rub it up against the business culture that may be ingrained or may have been there for years before you even got there. But even though that you're doing it for the better, that you're doing it to protect the organization, to help them be able to scale and go do this new, this new thing that they want to do, you're not going to get very far if you're not able to communicate effectively. And so again, communications is a very big thing. Not just communications, but that listening piece is hearing, and being able to, effectively communicate why you need to do it, and then be able to listen, to why, to people who are giving you feedback. Another big thing is collaboration. I go ahead and I talk about this all the time. Security does not exist in a box anymore. We're not, the guy in the back room back here that the CIO brings out every once in a while. Now, more and more, the CISO role is a role where, you have a lot more visibility. There's a lot of CISOs now that report to the CFO or report to the board or report to some type of operating committee. And so it's like, having that level of visibility and to be successful at it means that they're requiring you to deliver, to get projects done, to reduce risk, to manage, issues that compliance has found so that we can get SOC 2 certified, so we can get PCI certified, whatever it is, and to do that, you can't do it by yourself. It's just not going to happen. The security stack is so intertwined with the IT stack. You're going to have to work with IT regardless. Even if you don't report to the CIO, you and the CIO are going to have to work together. You're going to have to work with the other business units. Because really, as I mentioned, you're providing a service to them. You're managing issues that their employees, your customers, are causing. A lot of it is business or technical related risk. And you have to be involved with them to know about it, to know new projects that they're working on, to know issues that they're having. So you got to collaborate. You got to go ahead and be out there and be willing to talk and to go ahead and listen to them. And I look at the fact that you're not always going to get your way. There's sometimes the business is really going to outweigh you. They have to do it this way. They're making $100,000 an hour off the e-commerce portal doing this. And you're like, well, I need to shut that down because I ran my vulnerability scanner. My vulnerability scanner says this. Well, your vulnerability, of course, the CFO and all them are looking at you like, what you could do with your vulnerability scanner. So, that's where you need to back it off. That's where the whole collaboration piece comes in, and you got to look at, okay, what kind of secondary controls can I put in? Maybe we can go ahead and VLAN this puppy. Maybe there's some other things that we can put in place to reduce this risk as much as possible so they can still go ahead and do their thing, and I still stay employed. So it's that. You've got to be willing to go and collaborate and work with people, the whole teamwork piece. Many of us veterans already have that. You've taken it up a notch when you come into private industry, because a lot of times you're going to find, people in these various business units, they're extremely focused on their bucket. They're extremely focused on, this is mine. This is my money. This is how we're going to do this thing. Well, unfortunately, cybersecurity, you branch across all of these various buckets, and you're trying to figure out how to go ahead and help all of them. And a lot of times they're squirrels. They don't want to play together. And so you've got to go ahead and collaborate. You've got to communicate and listen. It gets really interesting. And these are soft skills that, hardcore technical people don't have. But it's, you've got to develop them. And if you're a good CISO and you've got some really good core technical people working for you who you're, mentoring and leading them to be in charge of teams, you got to be thinking, okay, if they're missing some of these soft skills, for them, for their professional growth, they need to get comfortable working with the other departments. They need to go ahead and start working on projects that are going to be, matrix type projects where they're intertwined with other business units. They need to go ahead and start being visible and to start speaking and working with people, and start developing these collaboration and communication skills, because eventually they're going to outgrow you. It's going to be time for them to leave and take that next position, and you want to make sure they're ready.
Yeah, that's, I think, one very understated quality for CISOs is listening. And I've been listening to you, and you've said it like 6 or 7 times, and I think we'll probably say it 10 more in the time we have remaining. But listening is so critical. Listening, like you said, fish tacos and beer in San Diego is a big thing, right? Fish tacos and beer, and just let them talk about where they're going. The one thing I will tell you from COVID that I miss the most is those conversations, right? Those impromptu conversations, because Zoom and Teams and all these great networking, kind of communication tools that are out there is not the same as sitting with someone for fish tacos or beer, or grabbing a cup of coffee in the break room, or a beer for happy hour on a Friday. There's aspects of communication that you get an idea of where the business is going as a CISO that helps you plan ahead and adjust your map and get your team ready to go. It looks like this team is working on this project, which we haven't been briefed on yet. Let's go ahead and see, what are we doing now? How can we streamline what we're doing to their project, so that way we don't slow it down, because it's really cool. It's probably going to be a game changer for the company or whatever that is. And we don't often see that to be the case, right? Like if we listen more instead of talk, would be able to pick up on those signals, but we don't always, unfortunately, do that. Let's talk, if you don't mind, slightly on kind of beyond enterprise, beyond security. Let's talk a little bit about hiring and kind of team building, right? I do a bunch of podcasts, one of them with, Renee Smalls, one of our mutual friends. And every Thursday we do something now called CISO Thursday, where I join him, and Naomi Buckwalter also joins us, and we talk a little bit about breaking into cyber. As CISOs, like, what do we care about? Do certs matter? Does experience matter to you? What do you look for when you're hiring someone?
Depending on the job, obviously there's a certain level of experience and stuff that I'm looking for, because, there's certain skill sets that I'm expecting, because they're going to be coming in, whether it's an operational job or whatever, and I need to make sure that they can hit the ground running and be able to work well with the team. But there's a part of team fit, because cybersecurity, just like in the military, the teams work extremely close together. We work 24/7. We work long hours, long days together, and so you have to be able to have that fit and know that you can trust this person to get their deliverables on time, to be there when it matters in the middle of an incident, or to support you. So the team fit piece is something that we really look at. But another thing too I look at is obviously is not just the experience. Do they have the skills that I need? But I also look at passion. And what I mean by that is, okay, you've been in security for 6 years, and your last 6 years has been basically you've been a security analyst at this one company, and all you've done is just this one job for 6 years. Then I look at somebody else and they're like, okay, they were at this job for 2 years as an analyst, and then they switched over and they became an engineer at this company, and they've done 4 or 5 different projects under their belt, and they're also volunteering at B-sides, and they also write occasional articles or do a podcast or whatever. That's passion. Number 2 is what I'm interested in, is because the fact that one thing I've learned in cybersecurity is that there's a continuous education, continuous knowledge component. We deal with threats that are not static. Stuff's always changing. We're supporting businesses that are not static. They're dynamic and always changing. Many of the problems, many of the issues, many of the risks that the business generates that we have to go ahead and manage are constantly changing. And we have to manage them, assess them, monitor them, and so I need people that aren't 9 to 5, that aren't a box, that aren't, hey, just give me my little job and I'm going to sit here. Instead, I need people where this is a passion, where they're continuous learners. They're always got their hands in and they're learning new things, and they're expecting that the job is going to be that way. And they're asking for it. They're asking to work on different projects, to work with different technologies. That growth, that's what I'm looking for. And I don't care if you only got 60 to 80% of the skill sets. I look at one person who sat in a cubby for the last couple of years, they've got all the skill sets that I'm looking for, but that's all they've done. And then I got this other person who may only have 60 to 80% of the skill sets I want, but they've done all of these other things. They got that passion. I can teach them, and they will integrate with my team better, because of how fast we move and because of the changes and just the dynamic aspects of what I look at and what I build when I build teams. And that's what I look for.
Yeah. It's such a pain point for a lot of people trying to come into cyber, or people trying to advance in cyber, which is, I like to call, our job description has an HR signature to it. You know what I mean by, like, you're trying to fill a rec and you put in, the job requirements, and the job description, and then you put in the hiring requirements. And I often always forego a 4-year college degree, because like you said, passion to me matters more. If someone went and got their security plus and their network plus, and they've got 4 or 5 certs under their belt, they got 5 years of experience. They started off as maybe a pen tester, then they moved on and did something else, and then another thing. I'm more interested in that candidate, but a lot of times I never get that candidate if I let HR control my job rec, right? Because they're going to add bachelor's degrees required, and I'm like, well, not really. No, we're not. I'm not asking for a lawyer or an accountant. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or even a project manager, right? Because I understand, some project management, I've had the discussion with HR where they go, it's not just a PMP that's enough. We want someone with a 4-year college degree. We want to see that, I'm like, and they made their case, and, you can't win every battle. Like you said, you got to be ready to lose, and I lose that one. But like on other positions, I always fight for the fact and maybe not have a college degree. In your experience, has that always been a battle for you as well, or am I the only one going through what I like to call the HR email signature on every job rec?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've had to, what I've done is when I come in as a CISO and I've got job, they give me, hey, you can hire a couple of FTEs. I write the job recs. I don't let HR write them. I write the job recs because I know there's specific things I'm looking for, and there's specific things that are required, and And typically the things that are required are all going to be around specific skills and experience or specific soft skills that I'm looking for. And then things that are optional will be around degrees and will be around certifications, and then I might put, at the bottom, nice to have, you might get extra points if you've got, some of these things, but I've never, even when I was in DOD and civil service, I would go ahead and say, they would say college degree required or professional certs in lieu of degree. So I would look for certs and experience in lieu of a degree, just to try to get around that. Because I didn't want somebody, okay, I've got a college degree, but you don't know shit about putting a network together. In lieu of, okay, you've got 4 or 5 certs and an associate's. Okay, I'll take you. It's that kind of thing. I've had to actually walk multiple HR teams through. Even ones where I've gone and interviewed as a CISO trying to get into a role, I get turned down, and then I reach back and ask, hey, what could I have done better? And I get a chance to actually talk with the HR team, and I'm like, okay, hey, good to go. I understand. I'm just not the fit that you're looking for, but understand your guys' job rec. You understand this is written for a unicorn. This is written for something you've been trying to hire for 6 months, and there's a reason why you haven't found a CISO for this role. You guys got that right? And they're all looking at me like, what? And then I walk them through and explain to them, CISOs follow a career path like anybody else. And they tend to have specific skills. And what you're looking for is 0.01%. You very rarely have a CISO that also knows product and also knows how to code AI and also knows how to do, just stuff that just off the wall. You don't have CISOs that know that, and it kind of applies to the same thing when you're trying to explain to them, okay, I need a security analyst, and my job rec, you don't take an IT network analyst position and just throw in a couple of security terms and say, okay, boop, it's the same thing. It's not. It's a totally different type of education and skill sets and experience. And I heavily encourage, for CISOs that don't let HR write your rec. Just because there's not a large database out there for them to pull from.
Right.
So there's a lot of IT stuff, not cybersecurity stuff. And so they'll take IT stuff and kind of, bastardize it a little bit and add a little bit here and a little bit there. And it's almost like a Frankenstein experiment. And then they turn it loose. And then you can't understand why you've been waiting 4 months to hire this security engineer and you're still waiting.
Yeah, I've been pretty good about writing my job recs. I think my complaint is, I'll hand it over to HR to post it. And then I go to the website and I'm like, they've added 4 requirements, right? Kind of like, the disclaimer, right? And they're like, college degree required. And I'm like, no, I specifically wrote college degree not required. College degree's an advantage, but not required. Certs or passion or, soft skills. Yeah. I mean, experience matters more, I think, than that. And I'm not dismissing, again, a lot of people think I get a lot of emails from people say, James, why do you hate college degrees so much? And I go, I don't hate college degrees. I just feel like college isn't for everyone. College wasn't for me. I did 2.5 years of college and I never finished. I mean, it wasn't for me, but I went on and I became an entrepreneur and sold several companies. And now I'm in security. So I did my certs.
And the way I look at it is, I've got multiple college degrees. My sons have college degrees. I'm not good or bad dealing with them. I just don't think they should be the only defining character, the only defining thing that you're looking for to hire somebody.
But they turn off because of the automated HR process. And I don't want to make this an HR conversation. We're going to transition from this here in just a second. I think it's great to have your voice kind of on this because you are one of the leading voices in our community. And so, a lot of the HR processes are automated, right? Where if you don't have a college degree and they scan your CV and college, you don't have anything on there, you're automatically disqualified, and you're disqualifying a candidate that you and I would probably love to have on our team, because guess what? He volunteers at B-Sides. He's in the Capture the Flag competitions at RSA and DEF CON and Black Hat. He's active on Discord and Slack channels. He's within the community. And we'd love to have that person. And then, a month or two after this person applies and they get rejected, you see a post with your job rec on LinkedIn and you go, how could I not get it? and you kind of reach out to that person and you go, I didn't know you applied for the job, you know, then you reach out to HR and they go, oh yeah, the system automatically filtered them. And you're like, automation, right? Like you love it, but you learn to hate it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And even as a CISO, you know, you're a senior level security executive, and you see this new CISO role over at a company that you're just like, oh, this would be amazing, and you go ahead and apply for it, and you never hear back, you never hear from them or anything,
Right?
And then you just basically realize, yeah, you know, the system ate your resume. You know, you never got a chance to find out what buzzword were they looking for that, you know, did you in.
So people have been teaching me tricks, and I guess for all of our listeners, even CISOs who are looking for other jobs, go to the job description and copy some of the language that they use in their job description and add it into your CV. And apparently that gets you in. Apparently that's the trick. That's how you manipulate the algorithm.
Yeah, which really sucks that you have to do that.
Well,
I would rather just talk to a person and just see, am I a fit or not?
Yeah,
You know,
I completely agree. So let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity. As a CISO, you've transitioned. You were before SoftBank, you were at WebRoot, right?
Yep.
And so if we talk a little bit about, you know, being a CISO role, where did you spend the most time on as a CISO? Where did you find yourself being, you know, divulging most of your time?
The thing about it is that, you know, it really depends on the company, you know, and where the company is in their, you know, in their road to maturity, you know, the way I kind of explain it. And what I mean by that is, you know, like when I got to the city of San Diego, they'd never had a CISO, they didn't really have a formal security team. And so I spent a lot of time managing up and managing, you know, outward, you know, and setting up champions in the various departments so they could understand why we mattered and what we were doing as we slowly built out the program. Now, when I got to WebRoot, I reported to the CFO. I was part of the C-suite. The office of the CISO was already in place, you know, and so I didn't manage up so much. Instead, I managed across, you know, because we were dealing with we had a lot of technology projects that we needed to put in place. There was a lot of, you know, just some basic hygiene processes that we needed to establish on how the various security teams were going to operate with each other, and how we would go ahead and interface with IT, and how we would interface with GRC and, you know, the other different teams. And then when I, you know, came to SoftBank, I'm their first CISO, you know, and I was building a security program from scratch. And so again, I managed outward again. You know, I'm working with legal, risk, compliance. You know, I'm dealing with internal audit. I've done like 8 audits, you know, since I've been here from all kinds of international regulatory agencies. You know, I spent an extensive amount of time working with IT because our stacks are intertwined and we work extremely close together. You know, so again, I mean, it depends on where the company's at. You know, if companies are more mature, it's less technical and it's more strategic. You know, and it's more strategic, and you're dealing with, you know, leaders and business units, and you're dealing with the enterprise view of security and how you are interconnected into that, and how service-wise, how you're doing and what you need to adjust when they make changes. If the company is, you know, new, startup, less mature, you know, small company, you're probably doing more technical. You're really involved in hygiene. You're really involved in the basic security controls, you know, everything from patch management and security scanning and endpoint security. And you're trying to make sure you get those right, and you put the policies behind them, and that your team, you know, builds the muscle memory of dealing with logs and pulling reports and working daily in operations, you know, so you're more technical focused. You know, so that's what I'm saying is that, you know, the business itself and where they're at when you are there as a leader, they actually will influence you as to which way you go. You know, it's just good that I'm very good at technical and strategic, and I can do both. But, you know, and it is. I mean, it just depends on the life cycle of the company, you know, where they're at.
Yeah, it's very true. I'll tell you that I work with several startups, and there's joys and there's reasons why I have white hair in my hair and in my beard. Yeah, it's so funny, but I feel like the more CISOs I speak with, the more whiteness and gray comes in, right? Like, it's fascinating. But with startups, I'll say one of the most rewarding aspects of doing security, and I think it's very underrated. It's yeah, you don't have the mega budgets, but you're able to start looking at security from the ground up. So you're able to build a very, very strong foundation so that when the budgets start coming in, as the company matures, as it takes on more capital, as it's adopting more clients and it's bringing on enterprise partners, you're really able to build out the program. And if you're able to kind of withstand those first several years of just, you were in the Navy, so think of just the rough seas that you're taking on, it's very rewarding. And that's been like one of the most rewarding things in my career, is working with these startups, because I find that if you're able to get to the founders, to those leaders early on, and explain how security early on in their business can impact them and help their company mature, grow faster, it helps them raise better capital. And that's been the case with one of the startups I work with. The three founders, we sat in a room and they go, well, why do we need to do all these things? And I'm like, listen, it's going to help us raise capital. Because when you go to an investor and they start to do due diligence, if you're this far ahead, your valuation's going to be higher. Strategically, you can ask for more money because you're doing the things the right way, and overall, it's going to help you scale better. And that did work. It was funny enough, but 3 months ago they came back and they had raised $17 million in their Series A round, and they were asking for 10, but they got 17 because the investors went, well, guess what? You guys are on the right track for security. We want to budget and give you a little bit more for security. We want to give you more for marketing. We want to scale you guys quicker. So we want to give you more money so you can scale quicker because you're already way ahead of it. Whereas sometimes, this also from working with companies, they get to a Series A and it's a half-baked product that's in POC stages a lot of times, kind of stepping out of POC, but there's still a lot of work to do, and you're raising a lot more money, not to scale, but to fix all the things that weren't really thought of in the startup phase as you were building your POC. And so there's an aspect to that. So, I've spoken about my most rewarding kind of projects and so forth. What's maybe the most interesting cyber project you worked on?
I would say probably what I'm doing right now at SoftBank. SoftBank's interesting because we're 100% cloud, and so the security stack's very different. When you really think about it, data, security moves down to the data layer. It moves down to the endpoint. And then also being a regulated entity, you're required to go ahead and prove how you're protecting data. You're required to make sure, no insider trading, and so the way you design the stack shifts, the technologies you put in place, shift. Even with our SIM, we use Logic and the dashboards we're building and the technologies we're integrating into it, the views and data that I want to look at, everything, changes. And I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, it's very different. I don't have to worry about things that are on-prem, so much. Instead, I'm looking at the fact that, with it being on the endpoint, I'm more focused now on what my employees are doing with the endpoints at their home. I'm focused on when they're on travel. I'm focused at where the data's at and who's accessing it. It's a different security puzzle. It's something that I haven't, I've been so busy trying to deal with on-prem stuff and servers that were aging out and racks of equipment that we needed to get rid of. And now somebody else has that headache. That's not my headache. Instead I get to be more strategic and build something that is fully integrated in cloud. And we're doing a lot more of now of, okay, are we able to see certain things? Are we able to verify it? And how do we document this? And I'm actually having fun. I have to admit, it's been a lot of fun. And I still have to deal with regulators. You still have to deal with auditors and being able to prove everything and write policy and make sure you got controls in place and all that stuff. That's just part of being in cybersecurity. But so that's what I was saying, is it isn't really one thing. It's just this overall process over the last 16 months of being able to build a security program from scratch that's 100% integrated in cloud has been just a lot of fun.
I'm grateful for the cloud as a CISO, because you're right. And it's like I said, working with startups, being able to influence them to not have servers but go directly into the cloud, start building in the cloud. It's very different from having racks. The headaches are different.
Oh, yeah.
And
the hygiene issues that you have to worry about are different. It's just you do when you're building things out. I mean, I usually start with CIS 20. Go ahead and get that. If I get about 65%, then I'm good enough to jump over to NIST. And then even when I jump over to NIST CSF and get a baseline, and then I'm like strategically looking at, okay, which set of projects did we do core first? And then I bring the other business units in and have them throw their input in, so I better understand from a business perspective what we should be working on. But again, a lot of these things are SaaS related. A lot of these things are, okay, I'm going to have to spin up a couple of servers, and then you start thinking, hey, we're regulated. All right, we've got to store this data. How long we got to hold this data for? We got to prove no one's got access to it. Just the encryption issues start, clicking through your head. Yeah, I have to admit, it's been an ongoing puzzle that keeps on giving.
But it's a fun puzzle. And I think a lot of people don't comprehend how much fun it is to look at a multi-cloud environment and try to build it across, data and spooling up servers and DevOps and all the different environments and containers and oh man, like I have a whiteboard behind this screen, and it's a whiteboard that's not hung. Right? It's a whiteboard that I have whiteboards hanging all over my office, but I have one whiteboard that's huge that I don't hang. It's actually on the floor, and I'm like a little kid when I'm drawing and I'm whiteboarding, right? Yeah. Different problems. I'm sit on the floor and I just whiteboard it, kind of like a little kid drawing in his notebook. And my wife will walk in on me sometimes and go, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm whiteboarding some architecture." And she goes, "Why don't you just hang this whiteboard?" And I'm like, one, I'm not a good handyman. Can't hang a whiteboard that large. Like, it'll probably be like, like hanging my world map took me like 20 minutes just to try and get it even so it doesn't look twisted, right? So I go, I'm not very good at it. And number two, like when you're able to look down at something, I feel like you get a different vision. You get a different perspective.
I can probably see that, yeah.
It's like looking down a clear box. There's an aspect to seeing things working on the inside that's different. I don't know if you've ever been on a boat with a glass bottom. That's what I like attribute it to, right? Like having a whiteboard on the floor is kind of like being on a boat with a glass bottom. You're looking down, you see the fish under you, and if you see a shark coming up, you freak out. But overall, it's okay. I'm more scared of dolphins than sharks. We've had that conversation before. Yeah, we were. So, as a veteran of our industry, as one of the thought leaders, what do you think is something that we as a cybersecurity community have started to really overcome? It's a problem that's maybe been around that we've maybe are starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, per se.
I think the diversity issue is now more public. It's more visible. There's a lot more groups now that I see, for people of color and for women, in cyber. And I think it's a good thing. I think diversity just makes us smarter. It makes us better. You bring in more people with different views, different skills. And that's what I'm loving it. It's something that myself and Chris Roberts and several of us have been preaching about for years, and fighting with people about that. We only get better through it. And what I like now is there's more organizations that are active. There's more groups that are coming out. There's even more podcasts that are coming out that that have that, and it's something that I'm really excited to see. And I'm extremely happy that when I get a chance to go on one of those podcasts or talk with people that are involved in these various communities, there's veterans in all of them. Yeah, and that just says something about the community that we come from. But yeah, it's something that I'm extremely happy that we are, but I still think that we've got a long ways to go. And that we just can't give up. We're just getting started. And I'm also big for neurodiversity. I've worked with people that have had autism, or that are in the spectrum, that are still brilliant, that still bring things to the team, that still bring, that are exceptional. You just have to, you work with them differently. And I'm just like, it's just a different type of diversity. It's just a different type of skills. They're just differently enabled. I don't look at them as being disabled. They're just differently enabled. And I look at, okay, how do I integrate them? What do we got to do so that we can work together? And I have two sons, who are now in their 20s. One's, doing school in IT, and other one's actually working in data science. And both of them, have forms of autism. And the kids are amazing. Seeing the world through their eyes has humbled me and has made me realize that, the more diverse we are, the stronger we are. And I'm extremely excited to see that as a community, we're starting to embrace that.
Yeah, I'll second diversity, I'll third diversity, and I'll fourth diversity. One thing that is very often not discussed is, I wouldn't say the lack of diversity, but I'd say the lack of appeal in cybersecurity to create a diverse workforce. Meaning we've made it seem like we only need people who can code and write Python and engineer and architect, and we need so much more. GRC is something that, I look at veterans that are coming out of combat and they go, well, I want to get into cyber. What should I look at? And I was like, go to GRC. And they go, really? Why? And I'm like, well, because it's a lot of strategy. It's a lot of planning. It's a lot of compliance. I go, it'll be perfect for you. Combat people are people who love to strategize, or are always looking to solve stuff. They're quick on their feet, so they're able to, kind of quickly come up with stuff. I go, and if you really like that, then get into it, or go do a boot camp in cyber and see what you like, stuff like that. I feel like there's a need for more diversity. But we're starting to adapt to it. And you're right, there's more podcasts. We're seeing more groups come up. I'd like to see a more united front. Like, one of the things I insist on is, even doing our Veteran Day, our Veteran November episode series, I now have a banner that I'm making. And it's got everyone I've had on the show, 26 individuals. And guess what? I've got men, women. Who would have thunk it, right? But guess what? I've got white, black, Asian, Arab, Indian, Pakistani, all these different nationalities within our armed forces, right? And all of these people are in InfoSec, and that just shows you the amount of diversity that's within our industry. And yes, we need to get more and we need to get better, but we don't need to separate, meaning we need to integrate it into our bigger shows. We need to integrate diversity into the cybertechs, the RSAs, the DEF CONs, the black hats. It needs to be part of it, and not just in a side event, but on stage. It needs to be, a panel shouldn't be 4 men and a woman moderator, but a panel should be 2 women, 2 men, and a moderator, right? Like, those are the kind of stuff I look at that really show me the progress. And I think that's critical. All right, folks, we are wrapping up here. And before I send Gary on his merry way, we do have something here, Gary. I like to call it the CISO Insight Round. It's kind of like my fire round. 6 questions, and I'll take you right through it, folks. So here comes our CISO Insight Round. Here we go, Gary. So I've got a buzzword graveyard in my backyard. I have a very nice wooded Georgian backyard. What's one buzzword you'd bury in my backyard?
Defense in depth.
I don't think David and Alan are going to be happy with you right there, but
yeah, I can hear Alan. Brother, what are you doing? Oh, I love their podcast. I'm not talking their podcast. I'm just saying defense in depth. I'm freaking tired of that shit. Anyhow, next.
Well, for 2 weeks in a row now, we've had brand new words. Defense in depth, you're the first to actually bring it up. So I'm going to have to go and dig a 6-foot hole. I think my daughter's got a date next weekend, so it'll be perfect. I'll dig it, bring the boy out back and show him the little burial hole, the graveyard. And I'll be like, if you touch my daughter, I'll bury you there. That'll be good. What's one technology that'll change the way we do
it's, I have to admit, I mean, I still think it's still growing and it's still changing, but just, I'm getting more and more involved with, how AI and machine learning are used algorithm wise. And I honestly, when everybody talks about it, they just look at it and say, hey, we just use it and it helps us go through the bad guy stuff and find this. There's so many other nuances with that. And I'm learning a lot more from my son, through data science, and it's just amazing. And, I'm looking forward to the other 90% of the stuff that technology does that cybersecurity doesn't use it for. I'm waiting for it to really mature. And,
I agree with AI and machine learning. So what's the last book you read?
The last book I read was, I'll go over here and pull it. You can see it. Call Sign Chaos.
Yeah, General Mattis.
Dude, I freaking love the book.
I just ordered it. I literally just ordered it this weekend. It's the one. I wish he did the Audible. I hate the Audible when the author isn't reading the book.
Yeah.
When they get a different voice reading the book. What's the last movie you saw?
Doom.
Doom. Awesome. What's your favorite music?
Crowder.
Awesome.
It's praise music. Yeah.
So what's what's one thing you took away from the COVID-19 crisis?
It helps having a nice back cave to hide out in. What? Honestly, what I'm finding out, you've got to get out every once in a while. I understand that you're supposed to hunker down. You got your mask. You're doing it. We're doing what we need to do. I swear to God, you got to get out every once in a while just to meet human. And we're starting to do, like here in San Diego, a bunch of us local CISOs, once a month, I'll get together with one of them for lunch. We show up masked, we're doing what we're supposed to do. We sit outside, we do our thing, but just being able to talk to a human, it makes me, you really learn, you can work remotely, do everything remote, but having that human interaction is, I think, extremely critical as well.
Brilliant. Folks, Gary Hayslip, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Gary, you've been a treasure of information. I appreciate it. We're going to have more veteran episodes for those that are watching us on YouTube and have missed all the previous ones. If you are now tuning in and you're just watching this, make sure you go back and listen to the episode that we published yesterday for Veteran November with Gary Hayslip talking about his military and inspiring us all of how to transition. That's it for us here today, folks. We'll be back with more tomorrow, another episode of Veteran November. Happy Veteran Days for all my fellow veterans. Gary, thank you so much for your service. Thank you for all that you do for not only veterans, but the InfoSec community. You are a real champion, sir.
Thank you, Eddie. And again, thank you for your service as well.
Folks, a lot more coming back tomorrow. Until then, stay healthy and stay cyber safe.
Make sure to subscribe to our podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. And get all the latest information at cyberhubpodcast.com.